The most dangerous thing you can do is wake up in a world that prefers to sleep. Not dangerous because you'll harm others, but because you'll discover that the life you've been living, the conversations you've been having, the roles you've been playing, are all part of a grand theatre where everyone has forgotten their acting. Joseph Campbell knew this secret, woven through every myth he studied. The hero's journey begins not with a sword or a quest, but with a moment of terrible, beautiful recognition that everything you thought was real is just the scenery. You've felt this, haven't you? Sitting in meetings where everyone nods solemnly about quarterly projections, while something inside you whispers that none of this matters. Standing at cocktail parties where the chatter flows like water around rocks, where people perform their success stories like rehearsed monologues, and you find yourself watching from somewhere outside your own body, wondering when everyone agreed to this elaborate charade. This isn't cynicism speaking. This is the hero stirring within you, the one Campbell wrote about in every culture's deepest stories. The ordinary world, as Campbell called it, isn't just your hometown or your daily routine. It's the collective trance we call normal life, where we sleepwalk through days measured by alarm clocks and deadlines, where we mistake our job titles for our identities and our bank balances for our worth. It's the world where conversations never go deeper than weather and weekend plans, where questions about meaning are met with nervous laughter or quick changes of subject. You know this world intimately because you've been swimming in it, breathing it, until one day you realize you've been holding your breath all along. But something shifts. Maybe it happens during a quiet moment when the mask slips and you see yourself clearly in a mirror, or in the middle of a conversation when you hear your own voice saying things you don't believe, or in those liminal hours before dawn when the world is soft and you remember dreams that felt more real than your waking life. This shift isn't comfortable. It's the call to adventure Campbell identified in every mythic journey, and it rarely arrives with trumpets and fanfare. Instead, it whispers, there is something more, something truer, something alive waiting beyond the boundaries of what everyone else accepts as reality. The mechanical nature of ordinary existence becomes impossible to unsee once you've glimpsed it. The same conversations replaying like broken records, the same emotional patterns cycling through relationships, the same fears and desires driving decisions like invisible puppet strings. Campbell understood that every hero in every story faces this same moment of recognition, that the life they've been living is not their life, that the person they've been being is not who they are, that somewhere beneath the layers of social conditioning and inherited expectations lies a self they've never met. This recognition brings its own kind of loneliness. You begin to notice how rare it is to have a conversation that touches something real, how unusual it is to meet someone who's willing to speak from that deeper place, how isolated you feel when surrounded by people who seem content to live on the surface of existence. You're not better than them. You're not enlightened or awakened or special. You're simply someone who has heard the call and cannot unhear it, someone who has seen behind the curtain and cannot pretend it isn't there. The mythic journey Campbell mapped across cultures isn't about leaving the physical world. It's about awakening within it. It's about recognizing that the quest you've been waiting for isn't somewhere out there in some exotic location or future achievement. It's here, in the choice to live consciously instead of mechanically, to respond instead of react, to be present instead of absent from your own life. The hero's journey begins the moment you stop asking how to fit in and start asking who you really are. And that question, once asked sincerely, changes everything. The call to adventure that Campbell spoke of isn't a voice from the heavens or a magical owl delivering letters. It's the growing discomfort with a life half-lived, the increasing difficulty of pretending enthusiasm for things that leave you empty, the persistent sense that you're capable of something more authentic than the performance you've been giving. This call manifests as restlessness, as questions that won't quiet, as moments when you catch yourself going through motions that feel increasingly hollow. When the hero in Campbell's monomyth crosses the threshold from the ordinary world into the realm of adventure, they're not just changing geography, they're entering a state of being where the old rules no longer apply. In the interior journey of consciousness, this threshold crossing is the decision to stop living unconsciously, to stop accepting the mechanical responses and automatic behaviors that have been running your life like software you didn't know you'd installed. The solitude that follows isn't punishment, it's initiation. Campbell wrote about the wilderness where the hero must wander, facing trials that strip away everything unnecessary, everything false, everything borrowed from others' expectations. In your own life, this wilderness might be the space between who you were and who you're becoming, the uncomfortable territory where you're too awake to sleep but not yet fully conscious, too authentic to play the old games but not yet skilled at new ones. This is where the real adventure begins, in the territory Campbell called the special world. Here the hero encounters allies and enemies, faces tests and trials, learns new skills, and discovers hidden strengths. In the journey of consciousness, your allies are moments of genuine connection, books that speak to your soul, experiences that remind you of your own aliveness. Your enemies are the voices that tell you to go back to sleep, to stop being so sensitive, to accept that this is just how life is. The tests you face aren't dragons to slay or mountains to climb, but the daily choice to remain awake in a world that rewards unconsciousness, to speak truthfully in conversations that prefer pretense, to maintain your center when everyone around you is lost in their own dramas. Each time you choose presence over absence, authenticity over performance, consciousness over mechanism, you're completing another stage of the heroic journey Campbell mapped so carefully. But here's what Campbell understood that many miss. The hero's journey isn't about escaping the ordinary world, it's about returning to it transformed. The goal isn't to live in perpetual solitude or to reject all human connection. The goal is to develop the capacity to move between worlds, to be in the mechanical realm without being of it, to participate in the theater of ordinary life while remembering it's a play. This requires learning a new kind of loneliness, what Campbell might have called sacred solitude. It's not the loneliness of rejection or isolation, but the spaciousness that comes from no longer needing others to validate your reality. When you stop requiring the world to confirm who you are, you discover a freedom that no external circumstance can touch. You can love people without needing them to understand you, engage with systems without being enslaved by them, participate in conversations without losing yourself in them. The journey Campbell described isn't optional for those who've heard the call. Once you've glimpsed the possibility of living consciously, returning to unconsciousness feels like death. The mechanical life that once seemed normal now feels like sleepwalking, and the performances that once came naturally now feel like wearing clothes that no longer fit. If you've recognized yourself in these words, if you've felt the stirring of something deeper than your daily routine can contain, if you've experienced the strange mixture of loneliness and liberation that comes with waking up, then you're already on the path. You're part of an invisible community of travelers, people who've heard the same call across centuries and cultures, who've discovered that the most important journey isn't to anywhere else but to who you really are. Consider this an invitation to join a conversation that goes deeper than the surface, to explore questions that matter more than answers, to remember that you're not alone in feeling awake in a sleeping world. Subscribe not just to a channel, but to a way of being that honors the hero within you. Share your own experiences in the comments. What was your call to adventure? When did you first realize you were living mechanically? Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs to answer their own call. The trials Campbell wrote about aren't the obvious battles against external monsters. They're the subtle daily confrontations with the parts of yourself that would rather sleep. The real dragon isn't out there guarding some treasure. It's the voice in your head that whispers you're being too intense, too different, too much. The real enemy isn't a dark sorcerer, but the tendency to betray your own awakening for the comfort of conformity, to dim your light so others won't feel uncomfortable with their darkness. In the mythology of consciousness, the approach to the innermost cave is that moment when you realize how deep the conditioning goes, how thoroughly you've been programmed to live someone else's life. You discover layers upon layers of borrowed beliefs, inherited fears, and automatic responses that have been running your existence like background software. The cave isn't a place. It's the recognition that you've been living on autopilot, making choices that aren't really choices, pursuing goals that aren't really yours. The ordeal Campbell identified in every heroic journey is the moment when the hero faces what feels like death and discovers it's actually rebirth. In the interior landscape, this ordeal is the ego's death throes as you realize you're not who you thought you were. You're not your job, your relationships, your achievements, or your failures. You're not your thoughts, your emotions, or even your history. This dissolution feels terrifying because the ego equates it with annihilation. but it's actually liberation from a prison you didn't know you were in. What emerges from this ordeal is what Campbell called the boon, the treasure that makes the entire journey worthwhile. In the hero's journey of consciousness, this treasure isn't gold or magical objects. It's presence itself, the capacity to be fully alive in each moment instead of ghost-walking through your days. It's the ability to respond to life freshly instead of reactively, to love without attachment, to engage without losing yourself, to be alone without being lonely. But the real test comes when you attempt to bring this treasure back to the ordinary world, when you try to live from this deeper place while surrounded by people who are still asleep. This is where many heroes get lost, either by trying to force others to wake up or by gradually falling back asleep themselves. Campbell understood that the return is often the most challenging part of the journey because it requires integrating two ways of being that seem incompatible. The rare gift of authentic connection happens when you meet someone else who's made this journey, someone else who's faced their own ordeal and emerged with their own treasure. These meetings are precious because they remind you that you're not crazy, not alone, not the only one who's discovered that there's more to existence than the mechanical repetition of unconscious patterns. When two awakened beings recognize each other, there's an immediate understanding, a shared knowledge that transcends words. These connections don't happen often because authentic presence is rare. Most people are so invested in their performance that they can't afford to be real, so committed to their image that they can't risk vulnerability, so afraid of their own depths that they stay relentlessly on the surface. But when you do encounter someone who's done their own inner work, who's faced their own shadows and emerged more whole, the connection is unlike anything the ordinary world offers. This is why the journey Campbell mapped is ultimately about love, not the conditional love that depends on others being who we want them to be, but the unconditional love that arises from understanding that we're all struggling with the same fundamental challenge: how to be human, how to be awake, how to be authentic in a world that often rewards the opposite. The path of consciousness isn't about becoming special or superior. It's about becoming more human, more real, more capable of genuine connection. It's about developing the courage to be yourself even when no one understands, the strength to maintain your truth even when it's lonely, the wisdom to love others without trying to change them. If these words resonate with something deep within you, if you recognize the journey we're describing, if you felt both the terror and the liberation of waking up, then you're invited into a deeper conversation. This isn't just about watching videos. It's about joining a community of conscious beings who support each other's awakening. Share your own experiences, your own struggles and insights, your own moments of recognition and breakthrough. Your voice matters in this conversation, your journey has value, and your presence contributes to the awakening of human consciousness itself. The return that Campbell wrote about isn't a physical homecoming, but a psychological integration, the challenging art of living in the world without being consumed by its unconsciousness. You discover that the treasure you brought back from the depths of your own being isn't meant to be hoarded but shared, not through preaching or teaching, but through the simple act of being genuinely present in a world that has forgotten what presence looks like. This is the mastery Campbell called becoming Lord of Two Worlds, the ability to function effectively in the mechanical realm while remaining rooted in consciousness, to engage with the theater of ordinary life while never forgetting it's a performance. You learn to speak the language of the sleepwalkers without falling asleep yourself, to participate in their games without losing your center, to love them without needing them to change. The freedom that emerges from this integration isn't freedom from responsibility, but freedom within it. You're no longer driven by the compulsive need to prove yourself, achieve recognition, or accumulate security. You can work without being identified with your work, succeed without being inflated by success, fail without being devastated by failure. The ups and downs of ordinary existence become weather patterns you observe rather than storms that destroy you. This doesn't mean you become indifferent or detached in a cold way. Instead, you develop what Campbell recognized as the capacity for engaged non-attachment, the ability to care deeply without being controlled by outcomes, to love fully without possessiveness, to act from wisdom rather than fear. You're more involved in life, not less, but your involvement comes from choice rather than compulsion. The solitude that once felt like exile becomes a source of strength. You realize that being alone with yourself isn't punishment but privilege, that the capacity to enjoy your own company is the foundation of all genuine relationships. When you no longer need others to complete you, or validate you, or entertain you, you can be with them more authentically, offering your presence instead of your neediness, your fullness instead of your emptiness. The mechanical world continues around you, people still lost in their unconscious patterns, still playing their roles in the great theater of Maya, still mistaking the performance for reality. But now you move among them like a lucid dreamer, aware that you're in a dream but no longer trapped by it. You can participate in the dream without being hypnotized by it, play the game without forgetting it's a game. This is what Campbell meant by the freedom to live, the liberation from the compulsive patterns that once drove your existence, the capacity to respond to life spontaneously rather than reactively, the ability to be present for whatever arises without being overwhelmed or diminished by it. You're no longer the victim of your circumstances or the prisoner of your conditioning. You're awake, conscious, free. The journey never truly ends because consciousness isn't a destination, but a way of traveling. There are always deeper layers to explore, subtler forms of unconsciousness to recognize and release, more refined ways of being present and authentic. But you're no longer seeking something outside yourself to complete you. You've found the treasure Campbell wrote about in every myth, the recognition that what you were seeking was seeking you, that who you really are was never lost, only temporarily forgotten. The danger Campbell warned about isn't in making the journey, but in refusing the call, in settling for the mechanical life when consciousness is calling. The real tragedy isn't death, but unconsciousness, not failure, but never attempting to discover who you really are beneath all the layers of conditioning and expectation. The world needs heroes, not in the external sense, but in the deepest, mythic sense. People who've made the journey into their own depths and returned with the capacity to live authentically, to love unconditionally, to be present in a world that desperately needs presence. You are that hero. The call you've been hearing, the restlessness you've been feeling, the sense that there's something more, like that's your own heroic journey beginning. The adventure Campbell mapped across cultures and centuries isn't happening to someone else. It's happening to you right now, in this moment, where you recognize yourself in these words and remember who you really are, beneath who you've been pretending to be. The universe itself is waking up through you, remembering itself through your awakening, discovering itself through your journey into consciousness. You're not just taking the hero's journey. You are the hero's journey, the eternal story of spirit awakening to itself in human form, the myth that never ends because it's the very structure of existence itself.